When researchers analyze the reasons behind the collapse of the Third Reich, the focus usually falls on large-scale miscalculations. Hitler's flawed strategy, the exhausting campaigns in the East, the fuel shortages, or the lack of raw materials. Yet there was another factor, rarely mentioned in textbooks, but felt every single day by hundreds of thousands of soldiers. That factor was boots. Footwear became the small detail that revealed the systemic problems of the German war machine. The difference between the German and American approach was so striking that captured officers of the Wehrmacht and SS openly admitted their shock. The average U.S. infantryman was better shod than an elite officer of the Reich. For men who saw themselves as the pinnacle of Europe's military culture, this was humiliating and unexpected. The German army inherited a deep artisanal tradition. Since Prussian times, the soldier's boot had been regarded not just as an element of uniform, but as a symbol of discipline and strength. German craftsmen were renowned for their skill in working with leather and military. Footwear was considered the benchmark of endurance. Marschstiefel, the standard boot model of 1939, was made from solid leather. Its tall shaft reached mid-calf, while the sole was thick, stiff, and also leather. A single pair weighed more than 1.2 kilograms and cost about 24 Reichsmarks. For an ordinary soldier, that was a substantial sum. For the state, it was viewed as a justified investment in military strength. Officers wore footwear that was even more expensive and durable. Offizierstiefel were crafted from the finest calfskin. The soles, up to 8 millimeters thick, were treated with a special water-repellent compound. Such boots cost over 60 Reichsmarks and could last for years, often being passed down from one officer to another as a mark of prestige. But hidden within this pride lay a weakness. The entire system was oriented toward craftsmanship and longevity rather than mass production. Boots were made almost entirely by hand, slowly and expensively. At the start of the war, this seemed an advantage, but in a, quote, total war fought on multiple fronts, it became a trap. At the beginning of the 1940s, the U.S. Army still had the reputation of a second-rate force, with outdated equipment. But after America entered the war, everything changed. The world's most powerful industry got involved. The Americans treated equipping soldiers the same way they built cars or airplanes, through standardization and assembly lines. Out of this logic was born the combat boot M1943, footwear that became a true breakthrough. It was designed not by traditional shoemakers, but by engineers and orthopedic doctors. The main goal was not elite durability, but comfort and the ability to be mass-produced. A rubber and synthetic sole instead of traditional leather, lighter and longer lasting. Ventilation holes to remove moisture and reduce the risk of fungal infections. An orthopedic insole to support the foot during long marches. Quick lacing with metal eyelets instead of slow fastening systems. Weight, only 800 grams per pair, nearly 1.5 times lighter than German boots. The greatest advantage, however, was production speed. Factories in Detroit, Boston, and Los Angeles worked around the clock. The same conveyor lines that once produced Ford and Chrysler cars now stamped out more than 100,000 pairs of boots per day. In the summer of 1941, when the Wehrmacht stormed into Soviet territory, it became clear that traditional German footwear could not withstand the trials ahead. Endless mud, rain, swampy roads, and later the bitter cold turned boots into a constant problem. Sergeant Kurt Heinz of the 6th Panzer Division wrote home in November, "My boots fell apart after 2 months of marching. The soles cracked, the leather let water through. The frost finishes what the autumn mud had already started." Such complaints were far from unique. Soldiers wrapped their feet in rags, used improvised insoles made of wood or cardboard. In the conditions of a Russian winter, these makeshift measures became a matter of survival. The problem lay not only in materials, but also in the very philosophy of production. German boots were designed for European roads and barracks, not for the endless wilderness of the Eastern Front, not for the deserts of Africa, and not for the humid mountains of Italy. By 1942, Germany was already fighting on 3 continents. Rommel's Afrika Korps, the army groups on the Eastern Front, and the occupation forces in Europe all required constant deliveries of the most basic equipment. Among that equipment, footwear played a crucial role. But the German economy was unprepared for such demands. Artisan workshops, focused on craftsmanship, simply could not supply millions of pairs. Compromises began, and they quickly showed. Nobelbecker, a simplified version of the classic boots. Thinner leather, mixed materials. They lasted half as long, but cost 3 times less. Ersatz-Stiefel shoes made of substitutes, artificial leather, cardboard, pressed for man's wood. They literally fell apart within weeks. Captured boots footwear taken from the enemy. Germans massively used boots from Soviet, French, and Italian armies. By 1943, nearly a third of Wehrmacht soldiers were wearing non-German boots. Meanwhile, the United States was building a supply system on a scale the world had never seen. The Red Ball Express, the supply network for American troops in Europe, transported thousands of tons of equipment every single day. Among them, millions of pairs of new boots. Key principles of American logistics looked like this. Standardization. A single model of footwear for all branches of the military. Mass production. Conveyor belts instead of artisanal workshops. Stock and rotation. Every soldier had 3 to 4 pairs at once. Rapid replacement. Worn boots weren't repaired, they were simply discarded and replaced with new ones. The Americans understood. A soldier with cold and wet feet loses combat readiness faster than a soldier without ammunition. Investments in boots were, in fact, investments in health, endurance, and morale. The Second World War was fought in the most varied environments, from the Arctic cold of Kramst, Karelia, to the steaming jungles of Burma, from the deserts of Libya to the damp swamps of the Netherlands. The Germans placed their bet on universal boots. They worked well enough in Europe, but in extreme conditions from Africa to the Soviet Union, they turned into a liability. The Americans, on the other hand, created specialized footwear for each theater of war. Arctic boots for the freezing conditions of Alaska and the Arctic. Jungle boots for the humid tropics of the Pacific. Desert boots for the campaigns in North Africa. Mountain boots for operations in the Italian Alps. This approach allowed U.S. soldiers to remain combat-ready in any climate zone. The psychological factor. Footwear quality affected not only the physical condition of soldiers, but also their morale. Even before the war, American military psychologists studied and confirmed this connection. Well-shod soldiers were less likely to suffer from depression. Desertion rates fell by 23% when footwear supplies were sufficient. The overall morale of a unit directly correlated with the comfort of its equipment. German commanders understood this instinctively, but lacked the resources. The Americans, however, addressed the issue systematically, pouring enormous resources into details that, in reality, determined the endurance of an army. Industrial capabilities and priorities. By 1943, the contrast in production had become glaring. Germany, 2.3 million pairs of boots per year for an army of 5 million soldiers. United States, 45 million pairs for an army of 12 million, almost 4 times more per soldier. The priorities also differed sharply. Germany focused on tanks, planes, and artillery. America invested in fully equipping every soldier, from weapons down to the smallest details of gear. As a result, Germans could boast of having some of the best weapons in the world, yet marched in worn-out boots. American soldiers, on the other hand, had both advanced technology and reliable footwear that allowed them to use that technology to its full potential. Medical service data reveals the difference with stark clarity. Foot-related illnesses per 1,000 men per month. Wehrmacht, 1943, 45 to 60 cases. U.S. Army, 1943, 8 to 12 cases. Frostbite cases, winter 1943 to 44. Germany, 114,000 cases. United States, 23,000 cases, despite having a larger army. These figures speak for themselves. German units were losing combat effectiveness not because of bullets or shells, but because of their own equipment. American forces, in contrast, remained operational even under the harshest conditions. March 1943, North Africa, Tunisia. In an American POW camp near Kairouan stood Hauptmann Wolfgang Müller of the 21st Panzer Division. His once pristine officer's boots, symbols of pride and status, were now in ruins. Soles torn off, leather cracked, metal studs digging into his feet, leaving bloody wounds. An American medic, noticing the trail of blood in the sand, stopped and asked in surprise, "Herr Hauptmann, are you wounded?" Müller looked down and felt a wave of shame. An officer of an elite armored division, a man who had fought in France and Russia, now could barely stand in his own boots. 6 months in the desert had reduced them to scraps of leather. Sergeant John Rodriguez, in charge of the prisoners, glanced at Müller's feet and shook his head. "Sir, you won't get far like that. I'll find you a new pair of boots." Soon, he returned with a pair of desert boots designed specifically for North Africa. Light, brown suede, thick rubber soles, ventilation holes. They looked simpler than German parade boots. But the real difference became clear once Müller slipped them on. "This is impossible," he whispered, taking his first steps. They were half the weight of his own boots. Soft and flexible, with orthopedic insoles supporting his arches. Each movement brought relief, a comfort he hadn't felt in months. "These boots cost the U.S. Army $8 a pair," Rodriguez explained. "Every soldier here has 3 pairs, one to wear, one to dry, and one in reserve." Müller did the math instinctively. $8 was about 20 Reichsmarks. His own officer, boots had cost over 60. 3 times as expensive, yet they had fallen apart in half a 4-year. The American pair looked like they could last for years. "How can you produce them so cheaply?" he asked. "Not cheaply, Hauptmann. Smartly," Rodriguez replied. "Our factories make 50,000 pairs a day. Mass production makes them affordable for everyone." That evening, Müller wrote in his diary, "We did not lose this war on the battlefield. We lost it in the factories of Detroit." The Americans turned boots into industry and science. "We are still clinging to medieval craftsmanship," Feldrebel Kurt Braun, a veteran of 2 fronts. Kurt Braun had seen almost everything. His path stretched from Poland to Stalingrad, from Normandy to the Ruhr. In 5 years of war, he went through 12 pairs of boots more than any of his comrades. His feet became a living chronicle of the collapse of German military production. In 1939, during the Polish campaign, the boots were masterpieces, he recalled in a post-war interview. Thick leather, sturdy soles, waterproof treatment. In peacetime, such boots could last 10 years. But by the French campaign in 1940, things had already changed. New recruits received Boots of noticeably poorer quality, thinner leather, simpler stitching, cost-cutting in every detail. By 1941, when we marched into Russia, the difference was glaring. My old boots still held, but the newcomers were worn through within a month. The Russian winter of 1941 to 42 was a nightmare. The leather froze hard as stone. No matter how many foot wraps we used, our feet never warmed up. And in spring, when the snow melted, the boots soaked through within an hour. In summer 1942, Braun received a new pair. This time, ersatz boots. Cardboard inserts instead of leather. Synthetic soles instead of rubber. Cheap thread that tore at the slightest strain. They lasted a month. A month? My grandfather wore his Kaiser's boots for 30 years. After the First World War, we wore cardboard shoes that fell apart in the rain. The starkest contrast came in 1944 when Braun was captured in Normandy. The American soldier escorting the prisoners looked at his battered boots and said quietly, "Buddy, your shoes are in terrible shape. Want to trade? I'll get a new pair tomorrow." At first, Braun thought it was a joke, but the American seriously took off his combat boots, M1943, and handed them over. It was like leaping from the Middle Ages into the modern world, Braun recalled. The American boots were lighter, yet stronger. They flexed where they should, held firm where it mattered, and most of all, my feet could breathe. The American explained the system. Each of us has 3 pairs, one to wear, one to dry, one in reserve. Once a week, the reproque medic checks our feet. If there's any problem, you get a new pair. Braun sighed. We never had anything like that. We wore what we were given until it fell apart, and when it did, we scavenged from the dead. Hans Schmidt graduated from the officer school in Munich in 1943. He was only 22. A fiery believer in Nazi ideology, he had full faith in the technical superiority of the German nation over the rest of the world. His officer's boots, custom made in one of Munich's finest workshops with his own money, became the symbol of that belief. I paid 80 Reichsmarks 2 months of a lieutenant's salary, Schmidt later wrote in his memoirs. But I considered it an investment. A true German officer must wear true German boots. The first disappointment came almost immediately. After just a month on the Eastern Front, the expensive boots began to fall apart. Russian mud proved far harsher than anything he had imagined. The master in Munich made boots for strolls in the English garden, not for marches. Across Russian wasteland, he wrote bitterly. By the end of 1943, Schmidt had gone through 4 pairs. Each one was worse than the last. The Reichswar industry was cutting corners more and more, even on officers' gear. The turning point came in January 1944, near Anzio. His unit stumbled upon an American supply depot containing dozens of pairs of boots in different styles. I had never seen such variety, he recalled. Boots for infantry, tank crews, pilots, paratroopers. Special models for every climate zone. We had just one model for all purposes. He chose a pair of combat boots and was stunned by their quality. Soft leather that didn't freeze in the cold, rubber soles that didn't slip even on wet stone, quick lacing that could be tightened with one hand. The most important thing was this. These boots were designed for soldiers, not parades. He realized every detail had a practical purpose, not a decorative one. When the war ended, Schmidt was still wearing his American boots. His own German ones had long since fallen apart. Obergefreiter Karl Wagner, a story from the trenches. Karl Wagner was a simple infantryman, one of those who felt the failures of German logistics most painfully. The son of a Bavarian farmer, he had gone to war in 1940 believing in the invincibility of German arms. They issued me standard Marschstiefel, size 42, he recalled. They felt as solid as tank armor. I thought I would wear them through the whole war. Reality was different. After the very first 40-kilometer march, his boots rubbed his feet raw. The thick leather wouldn't give, and the hard seams cut into the skin. Maybe our grandfathers had tougher feet, Wagner reflected, but we city boys weren't prepared for boots like that. The Polish campaign passed without disaster. Short marches, good roads, mild weather. But in France, the real problems began. Long marches on cobbled roads destroyed even the sturdiest souls. By the end of the campaign, half the company was limping. Not from bullets, but from worn-out feet. On the Eastern Front, the boots failed completely. Wagner described the first Russian winter as pure hell. The boots froze like iron. Our feet never warmed, no matter how many foot wraps we wore. And when we went indoors, the melting frost turned them into blocks of ice. Summer was no better. Mud, dust, and swamps ruined boots in weeks. By autumn 1942, I was already on my fourth pair, each one worse than the last. The lowest point came in the winter of 1943 near Leningrad. His boots had fallen apart so badly that he wrapped his feet in canvas rags and tied them with rope. I looked like a beggar, not a German soldier. It was shameful to even see my reflection. The contrast became undeniable in 1944, when Wagner was briefly taken prisoner. The MFRN, American Guards, wore boots that still looked new after months of service. They explained a simple truth to me. Boots are a soldier's tool, like a rifle or a helmet. They must work, not just look impressive. The combat boots Wagner was given after his release he kept for the rest of his life, as a reminder of the difference between the German and American approaches. Dr. Werner Fischer served as a military surgeon in the German Fourth Army on the Eastern Front. His wartime diaries preserved unique records about the impact of footwear quality on soldiers' health. Autumn 1941. In the hospital, 40% of the patients suffered from foot problems. Blisters, fungal infections, frostbite. Almost all of it caused by poor boots. As a physician, he clearly saw the direct connection between equipment quality and combat readiness. His statistics were merciless. January 1942, 347 cases of frostbite per division. March 1942, 423 cases of fungal infections. May 1942, 156 severe blisters that rendered soldiers unfit for duty. Fischer conducted his own comparisons. Captured Soviet felt boots, Valenki, proved far superior in the cold to German leather boots. Soviet footwear looked primitive, but it fit the climate. Valenki were perfect for winter. Our boots became instruments of torture. His greatest shock came in 1943, when American POWs were brought into his hospital. A medical examination revealed a striking contrast. Not a single American soldier had serious foot problems. Their boots remained in excellent condition, even after months in the field. Orthopedic insoles, non-slip soles, breathable leather. He questioned the prisoners about the U.S. Army supply system. The answer stunned him. Weekly foot inspections. At the first sign of trouble, a new pair of boots. Preventive, treatment against fungus, special powders, antibacterial insoles. We had nothing like that, Fischer admitted. We treated the consequences instead of preventing the causes. In his concluding notes, he wrote, "The Americans understood a simple truth. An army marches on its feet. We forgot this, blinded by dreams of a miracle weapon." Major Ernst Kepler, the supply officer, tells the truth. Major Ernst Kepler was responsible for footwear supply in the 12th Panzer Division. His position gave him a rare view of the crisis of German military production from the inside. Not through rumors, but through numbers, reports, and warehouses. 1940 was a golden year, he recalled. We had enough quality boots for everyone. Each soldier received 2 pairs annually. Officers could still afford custom-made boots from master shoemakers. But by 1941, the situation worsened dramatically. The rice war economy could not keep pace with the Army's rapid expansion. We began receiving boots of lower quality. At first, the changes seemed minor, thinner soles, simplified finishing. But each year the compromises grew harsher. Substitutes instead of real leather, cardboard inserts, synthetics. As a supply officer, Kepler kept detailed statistics. His notes reflected the decline in stark figures. 1940, 24 Reichsmarks per pair, average lifespan 18 months. 1941, 22 Reichsmarks, lifespan 12 months. 1942, 18 Reichsmarks, lifespan 8 months. 1943, 15 Reichsmarks, lifespan just 4 months. Cutting quality only increased costs, the major concluded. Cheap boots had to be replaced 3 times as often. The expenses grew like an avalanche. The worst came in 1943, when German industry fully shifted to total austerity. Kepler received orders to distribute whatever footwear was available. Captured boots, pairs, salvaged from dead soldiers, even requisitioned civilian shoes. I issued French dress shoes, Polish boots, Soviet felt boots, whatever came to hand. The idea of a single standard was gone. The most painful moment for him came after Germany's surrender, when American officers showed him their supply depots. Millions of pairs of identical boots, sorted by size, model, and purpose. A system of college records that allowed planning years ahead, reserves for every possible emergency. Kepler had no illusions left. We fought like in the Middle Ages. We wore whatever we could find. The Americans approached it scientifically. In the first half of the 20th century, German military industry still rested on traditions shaped back in the 19th century: quality over quantity, artisanal precision, and an individual approach to every soldier. Traditional Marschstiefel, the symbol of that philosophy, produced handmade by master shoemakers. Time to make, 18 to 24 hours. Materials: calfskin leather, tanning compounds. Cost 24 Reichsmarks. The state considered it justified. Expected durability: 2 to 3 years under moderate use. The problem was that shoemakers thought, in civilian categories, boots designed for city walks or parade grounds were unfit for soldiers, marching day after day through swamps, sand, and frost. Johannes Kramer, chief technologist at the Salamander factory in Kornwestheim, admitted, after the war, "We made masterpieces, but not for war." The American footwear revolution. The American approach was the complete opposite. Instead of relying on traditional shoemakers, they brought in engineers, orthopedic specialists, and industrial designers. The combat boot M1943 became the turning point. Materials: upper, composite leather with water-repellent treatment. Sole: rubber with synthetic additives for improved traction. Insole: orthopedic, with arch support. Lining: quick-drying synthetic fabric. Engineering solutions: anatomical last, created after measuring 50,000 American soldiers. Ventilation system with perforations and channels to wick away moisture. Differentiated sole thickness: thicker at the heel, thinner at the toes. Special tread pattern for grip on soil, stone, and ice. Production process: Conveyor line with 47 operations. Manufacturing time per pair, just 12 minutes. Automated machines for cutting and stitching. Multi-stage quality control. Comparative analysis of technologies. Sole construction. German approach. Thick leather sole with iron nails for durability. Logic was simple. The thicker, the longer it lasts. American approach. Multi-layered sole rubber base. Cushioning mid-layer. Outer tread. Each element had a specific function. Result: German soles held up well on hard surfaces, but became dangerously canso, slippery on wet stones or ice. American soles provided traction in all conditions. Foot support system. German approach. High shaft reaching mid-calf, tightened with straps or long laces. The principal rigid fixation of the foot. American approach. Flexible support system, rigid around the ankle bone, but free at the joints. Special lacing allowed soldiers to adjust tension in different areas. Result: German boots often restricted blood circulation during long marches. American boots maintained the balance between stability and mobility, keeping soldiers' feet healthy. Ventilation and moisture control. German approach. Reliance on the natural properties of leather. It was believed that 10 down, good quality leather breathes on its own, and that this would be enough. American approach. An active ventilation system with perforations, channels, and rows. Special materials designed to wick away moisture and reduce overheating. Result: in German boots, feet often sweated and became clammy, creating the prison, perfect environment for fungal infections. American boots, by contrast, maintained a relatively dry and comfortable microclimate, even during multi-day marches. Mass production. Detroit versus Swabia. The greatest difference lay in the scale of production itself. Germany clung to artisanal methods, while the United States launched a true industrial revolution. German production capacity, 1943. 847 small workshops scattered across the country. Average output, 25 pairs per day. Total, about 21,000 pairs daily. Problems: lack of standardization, reliance on individual craftsmen, and an inability to reboard it. Scale up quickly. American production capacity, 1943. 12 specialized megafactories. Average output, 15,000 pairs per day. Total, 180,000 pairs daily. Advantages: complete standardization, independence from individual skill and the pendants, ability to ramp up production instantly. Innovations: in American manufacturing, standardized sizing. The U.S. developed a unified system based on measurements of 2.3 million servicemen's feet. In Germany, 17 different sizing systems coexisted, complicating logistics. Modular construction. American boots were built from standardized components, manufactured separately, and assembled on the conveyor line. In Germany, each pair was crafted as a single integrated product. Quality control. Every 10th pair was tested on machines simulating a 100-kilometer march. The Germans relied solely on the experience of the shoemaker. Logistics of supply. German system. Centralized production within Germany itself, with delivery to the front by rail and truck. Distances of thousands of kilometers meant delays that often stretched into months. American system. Decentralized depots on every front. Some footwear was even produced locally, while the rest was delivered quickly by sea transport. The average time from requisition to actual delivery was just 48 hours. Rotation system. German approach. One pair until complete wear, only then replacement. American approach. 3 pairs in constant rotation, one being worn, one drying, and one in reserve. planned replacement every 6 months regardless of condition. The economics of the footwear war. At first glance, American footwear seemed more expensive, but on the scale of a global war, their system turned out cheaper and far more efficient. German annual costs per soldier. 4 pairs times 24 Reichsmarks equals 96 RM. Medical treatment for foot-related issues equals 45 RM. Loss of combat effectiveness due to foot problems equals 67 RM. Total 208 RM. American annual costs per soldier. 6 pairs times $8 is approximately equal to 20 RM. Equals 120 RM. Medical costs equals 8 RM. Loss of combat effectiveness equals 12 RM. Total 140 RM. Thus, the American system was nearly 1/3 cheaper, while being vastly superior in quality. Specialized models. The Americans clearly understood different conditions required different boots. They developed several specialized models. Jungle boots, Pacific Front. Quick drying materials, antifungal treatment, drainage, holes, protection against leeches and insects. Arctic boots, Aleutians, Alaska. Double insulation, waterproof membrane, ice grip active. Sole, easy to put on, even with gloves. Desert boots, North Africa. Ventilation, sand protection, reflective surface against after overheating, lightweight construction. Mountain boots, Italy. Rigid sole for rocky terrain. Reinforced ankle support. Quick lacing, compatibility with climbing crampons. Germany, by contrast, essentially fielded only 2 models, the standard Marschstiefel and fur-lined winter boots, which in many situations proved inadequate. Americans, in 1942, established a special laboratory in Natick, Massachusetts. 23 specialists, engineers, doctors, psychologists studied everything. Biomechanics of marching with heavy loads in varied conditions. Microclimate inside boots. The link between foot comfort and morale. Materials adapted to extreme climates. Practical results. Optimal heel height for stability. Correct sole angle to reduce fatigue. Precise placement of support points. Ergonomic lacing system. Germans relied only on centuries-old shoemaking tradition. No serious scientific research was undertaken. Changes were made only after field complaints. Result: German boots remained outdated, while Americans advanced step by step with technological breakthroughs. Impact on tactics and strategy. Boot quality was not a secondary detail, but a factor directly shaping army mobility and operational capacity. In practice, even the strength of a sole or airflow inside a boot could influence the pace of an advance, soldiers' endurance, and the outcome of campaigns. Marching speed. American units could cover 35 to 40 kilometers per day, even across rough terrain. German units with the same loads managed only 25 to 30 kilometers. That extra 10 kilometers per day looked small on paper, but in the field it meant Americans seized favorable positions first, encircled enemies faster, while Germans arrived exhausted. Readiness after marches. American units. Up to 85% of soldiers combat ready immediately after a march. German units. Only around 60% remained fit for combat. The rest required rest or dressed. Even medical care. Thus, Americans could march and then fight without delay, while the Wehrmacht needed pauses costing time and strategic initiative. Operational endurance. American forces could sustain 6 to 8 weeks of active combat without rotation. German forces required withdrawal for recovery after just 4 to 5 weeks. Those 2 to 3 weeks often decided the outcome of major campaigns. technological backwardness as a systemic problem. The footwear issue was just the visible tip of the iceberg. It symbolized deeper pathologies of the German war economy. Conservatism. Germany clung to artisanal traditions, ignoring innovation. Resource constraints. Chronic shortages of quality raw materials led to declining to the Reverding standards and ersatz substitutes. Planning failures. No long-term forecasts of army needs decisions were made reactively, once crises had already erupted. Coordination gaps. Weak links between the front and industry. Factories learned of gaps, real problems, only when thousands of soldiers were already suffering frostbite or fungal infections. Americans, in contrast, built a system where every element, from bootlaces to logistics depots, fit into one coherent concept. Their solutions were not reactions to crises, but preventive measures, backed by science and planning. Germans remained trapped in old assumptions, constantly firefighting once the blaze had already engulfed entire fronts.